Hey, let me start this show today by show. I hardly think of this as a show, but this video by thanking Amanda and James for their nice donations. It's such a help to make these things possible. So much appreciated. I do know that you're getting something out of it, and tell your friends, etc. So. But James, second time, and thank you very much, Amanda, for your first contribution. At about video number 75, we covered the, on behalf of Jazz, we covered the question of the science of appearances. There's a book written by Meldrum, or written about Meldrum, containing largely his speeches or quotes, but it's describing a way of thinking that is pretty much parallels what we do in the Boston School way of thinking. And to bring the whole thing home, I finally got a copy of the hard book, and thanks to Rick, and so I finally culled through it all, and am just making notes, not drawing out a sentence or two here and there. But I found about 66 points he makes. I mean, really, virtually all the points he makes are points that I've made to my students over the many, many years. So I want to just show a page like the one you're now going to be looking at just this second. I want to show a page of these at a time. We're not going to talk about every single one of these points, or we'll be here for a lot more than an hour. But this page I'll probably cover mostly, because this is the larger picture of what we're trying to do. For those of you who are confused about some of the stuff related to anatomy lessons and all those sorts of things, this will probably help you a little bit. And by the way, Meldrum wasn't much of a fan of Monet, more of a fan of Manet, a big fan of Constable. There's a thing that we're doing with color that I'm having a hard time agreeing with. So I'm having a hard time agreeing with Meldrum about some of his points regarding color. But as far as the idea values and the approach to various aspects of laying in a picture, painting a picture, he and I think almost exactly the same for the most part. I wouldn't put students through some of the things he's doing, although I wouldn't say they're bad ideas. I just find them enormously tedious in the direction of sort of exercises and things like that. But yeah, just to get on with it, Max Meldrum parallels with Ingbretson thinking, okay? And of course, I say Ingbretson because Boston School is, I'm not there. I'm 2 generations away from those guys. And what I got from Gamble was gotten from a person who actually didn't do it, admittedly couldn't paint the way they did. So it's only Boston School to the degree that as I evolved more and more, I found myself painting like them, not looking like them in the sense of unfinished necessarily, but working from their same mindset on point after point after point. All right. And that's all, of course, in pursuit of just best processes for a painter, best methods. So here's the fundamental overall concept. Return to nature means the translation of ocular impression. So he's talking about this whole idea of you got to get back to nature. You got to get back to nature. What does get back to nature mean, right? It means the look of nature. We're talking about the appearance, nature's appearances. So he says, these are all Meldrum quotes now. He says, return to nature means the translation of ocular impressions within the limitations of a medium and in the perceptual order in which these impressions are defined. And as I look through his book, he says defined, he almost always means made or grasped by the brain. So here again, define or make visual phenomena in a perceptual order. That's what I call the visual order. So then he says again, the most easily seen impressions are the easiest to define. Again, that's one of the reasons you switch to the visual order. You start painting the strong things. And then the ability to analyze and define, that is, again, to analyze and then make or articulate the quality and order of the visual appearances, that's a partial sentence. But that's what you're looking for, that ability. First understand, and then to make, to articulate the quality and the order of the visual impression. And finally, the scientific order of the visual impression, and that's scientific order. I'm just calling it the visual order, but scientific, I think, is the best way of thinking of that is just relational thinking. So this to this and that to that, in doing it acutely, sharply, very well regulated. So, did I do this twice? All right, so let's just talk about a few of these points. And as I said, there's like, what is there, 6 or 7 per page? If I did that many, and if I did them as fast as I just did these, I could get conceivably through all of them in less than an hour. But I'm not convinced you'll want me to. So ocular facts. We paint ocular facts, not those acquired by other senses. And that's where you get the idea of naivete, the innocent eye. And my quote there is the right color, the right value, the right place, Boston School 101, right? Ocular facts, that's color, value, location on the page, okay? What some people would call values, form, and color. Form being shape, plus all the other stuff related to it. And that's an important thing, by the way, because I had never picked up on that. That was my entire training. I was raised with the word form meaning three-dimensionality, and I think it still does. It's just the spatial. And I'd much rather we use the word the spatial, but I see the word form meaning rounding, and I see the word in talking about the old painters, and I see it meaning the shape of an object or a visual unit. So now he says he's talking about when you're painting, don't tell your eyes what to see. Again, that's the innocent eye, right? It's exactly what we're talking about. Don't tell your eyes what to see. Listen, okay? And look for visually objective facts. Okay, so the visual, not the actual, was what Gamble said to us. You're painting the visual, not the actual. That's the visual data. And then what I always say is you're collating visual data. So remember, everything I'm doing right now, the first part of this thing where you're seeing the non-italics, that's Thompson talking. The italics is me. And when I don't put any in, it means we both say the same thing. Okay, is it easy to follow? Okay, so it takes a discipline to remain visual only. And he uses the word objective to say visual, so you don't think about things you know. And in our case, we say that we never talk about the shape of this or that, the shape of this or that. We're talking about shape, however it presents, okay? And that includes the idea of the arabesque, which is a shape created by the leading points in a composition. The next point, beauty of nature and joy involved in true art, beauty and truth. Well, he talks at least once about finding your amusement there, and there's enormous amounts of amusement to be found. In fact, our medium is a color value medium, right? Et cetera, right? It's a medium that plays. By the way, this has been referred to way back when, including in the Renaissance, as an art of color. And but the beauty is in what these things do in relation to each other. And what we find is that there's a satisfaction, let's say, if you want to call it a sort of a neutrifying quality in playing with these things to the point where you actually feel almost elated when you're in the presence, when you actually discover the relationships of things and what they're doing, what they're saying, the sort of the magic when it has that. So he talks about the impersonality and the universality of the medium. He said that's not in the subject, and of course I've said that to everyone I know. But you want to always have in mind that you want to make a picture that that the Japanese or the Buddhist or the Chinese or the Hindu, the Indian, or any other race or any other culture can actually look at and get joy from, get satisfaction from. So the subject isn't that, is it? The subject is not what's going to give that. It's in the play of color, light, form, line, all those things, okay? Again, there he's saying it in so many words, subject is nothing. It's not a world of things. And I have said to students before, things have a way of taking over. It was a quote from my mom who was complaining about the material world. And so now when you're painting along, he talks about, and many of these are, by the way, just practical quotes, and I've just taken them intermittently. I haven't tried to show you all the practical stuff at one point. I'm hoping that the time that they're sitting here or whatever, you can take a screenshot or whatever and have these things for yourself. But I'm going fast enough. I think I might in a half hour be able to get through all these, and I'm going to keep giving it a shot, okay? And if I can't, I'll start cutting off some at the end. But this idea of backing up your painting, so I remember any number of times getting to a point, I'm saying, I'm going to do this start right. I'm going to do this start visually, and then halfway through it, I'd start thinking about making things, making fingers or something like that. And the whole thing would go sideways, and it would look like a double-minded person had just done it. And I did actually literally I used the expression of Yosemite Sam, where he said he has got the sign. You see all these signs on the backs of trucks. It says "back off," and Sam's got his guns pointing at you. And so he was always my model when it came to this thing. You have to back up your painting, your truck. You get out of that visual, that non-visual rut, and get back into the visual. Okay, and then try to create a new rut for yourself, a discipline that you stay in. Think like a painter just means that. It means nothing more than that. That's what painters do. Painters are living in this medium. They're not living in the world of things. Hierarchy of and the projectivity of contrasts. He mentions that. Now, and tonal relationships. Again, this is what I call the visual order. There's a hierarchy of the projectivity. The higher the contrast with the sharper edge, you get the eye will just be hit by it. And something with a little bit weaker edge won't be hit. And so again, you have to do this thing about blurring your eyes and seeing which ones come at you first, because that's actually a visual order that nature exists in, right? You paint that, you don't get that, you just don't get what nature's doing. So I know you've heard all these things before, but I think this is a good little compendium. So, what did I just do? I did not mean to do that. Oops. All right. So intend exactly what you do and do exactly what you intended. This all comes from this idea of having a concept, executing the concept, and debriefing. Make sure you actually got what you went for, right? And you'll see that there are other things about that. When intend exactly what you do, it limits you very much, and he'll talk about that a little bit later, to one thing at a time. By the way, he does mention this in the very last one here, the schools of drawing and schools of color are equally problematical. As neither, and you saw that in the Henshi, where you saw that he didn't much do drawing. He does say he didn't respect shape in an articulate way much, and the draftsman guys don't appreciate the schools of drawing. Put color under the bus, and they also do. They actually lose the value game too significantly when it comes to the overall value play. Painting of objects does that to you. Okay, the painted data reveals the things. So you're painting a portrait, you just manage the data, and you got the head. And so I have the little Jack Horner quote that I've given you before. Gamble said it to me at one point. He just smiled at me, and he said, "Little Jack Horner sat in the..." No, so he put in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I." And that's the proper application of the visual data will give you the plum of whatever it is you're making, including the plum if that's what you're painting. So the fixed point of view, that whole idea, some people call it the focal point. You stand in one spot. Now, the sight-sizers typically have been taught to do that if they're coming out of the gamma background. You stand in one place, make sure you're aligned in exactly the same way every time you look at your subject. And so there's only one proper viewing point, and you got to make sure you're in it all the time. You don't want to be drawing 8 different paintings. It won't be true. It'll be a different one. Every time you move the slightest bit, the entire play of color value location is different. Now, the conversation, and here's one for Dan. Dan, this is the idea of the rule of thumbs. The rule of thumbs just means it's a general rule. It isn't always so, right? But Da Vinci was talking about seeing the whole, essentially. He was certainly talking about backing up enough so you didn't get distortion of perspective. But the idea of being at a distance where you can see the whole is an even bigger and more important one. So, and I've suggested before, you stretch out your arm, and most people, that distance will be about a third of the distance from here to your eye. So this would be the first picture plane you could do with a picture this big if you want to paint right here. But I see my students frequently will paint a picture this big from right here, and I have to push them back to 3 times this, which would be whatever, 4 feet away, 5 feet away. All right. So now he talks about being feeling-based, sensed, or felt in terms of the proportions and other things. So I've told people over and over again that you can't measure color. You can't measure. At least we don't have any tools to do it now. And you can only want to measure them proportionally anyway, because you can't paint the sun with the yolk of an egg, or you're trying to. And so, if you say it's not so hard to understand that you can't get values except by looking in, you might say guessing, but it's felt, right? And you can use numbers. You can say, is that halfway? Things like that between black and whatever the music is, my lightest light. And but it's sensed, isn't it? And there's no reason why the shape and angle can't also be similarly sensed. And they are, and it actually is a much more pleasing way to approach this whole problem. Works better with what I'm doing, for sure. Okay, so he mentions quick looks and don't peer in. So looking in is really a classic thing. Gamble is teaching the very same idea. But quick looks, look at the thing and get the idea, get the idea, get the idea. Okay, just keep your eye on the big idea. I talk about soft eyes and seeing flat. When you first look at something, close one eye, and the world in front of you will go flatter. And then but I also talk about using soft eyes. That means not aggressive ones, right? Just quiet eyes. The next point, there are multiple ways of using the eyes to help understand visual data. So that's what the blurring of the eyes is. I mentioned standing on your head. He mentions a few others. The quick look at it as if you were flying by in a car. So there are many ways, but what you have to remember there's the next point is that however you look at something. So if you blur your eyes to look at me and you're painting me and you have to do all this painting over here, if you blur your eyes at this painting, it should do exactly what this does if the data play is the same, right? When you blur at this, it should do the same as when you blur at this. It doesn't mean you blur when you're painting it or you're painting a blurry thing, okay? The visual data has to actually be true to life for you to look at it blurry, right? In other words, it has to be articulate in its edges and all those relationships. All right. By the way, if any of this brings out a question, just please put it to me and I'll deal with it as soon as I can after this, okay? Okay. Now, painting should be equally difficult no matter the subject. And I'm now quoting Gamble. Gamble told us that Paxton said, he told Paxton he hated landscape, and Paxton said, that's exactly what you need to do. But the thing is, you have to do all of them to just understand what the common language is that you're working on. Otherwise, you'll just do one language. You can't sit there and draw around the leaves of trees and not lose your life in this kind of a thing. And it doesn't even make any sense because you'll lose the visual impression. So are you going to paint differently? In our way of working, you don't have to paint differently. You paint the same everywhere. And you can paint, my way of laying in a painting will work to give me a loose landscape or will work to give me a fine, a Paxton-like finish. What you might call an academic likeness. So he talks about light disturbances, Meldrum does. That's what I call light effects. Light disturbances where dark meets light with a sharp edge is, it'll jar your eye if you want to call it that. It's a funny thing to say, but I just talk about it as light effects. I call them light. A dark meets a light. When a dark meets a middle tone, even there'll be an effective light. There'll be a weaker one, but they're effects. And the effective light. So, and he just talks about the way it rattles your eye or draws your attention, and you're supposed to pay attention to those first, and so on. And that's where here's the leading of the eye. That's the visual order. So the one that does draw your eye first is where you ought to put some time in, right? And keep on doing that, painting in the visual order, and painting the visual order. Okay. Everything is ordered relationally in a picture, but you'll find that it pays off to think about now. If I blur your eyes down and see who's on first. Okay, that's one of those comedy things. Look it up online. You'll get a kick out of it if you've never seen it. Is it Abbott and Costello? No, I forget who it is. Who's on first? I forget who it is. Very funny comedy line, a skit. So I just put after the form is Meldrum's word for shape. Hale uses it too. So if you read his book, note that. So, but then he talks about, and this is again a Paxton thing, he talks about floating data. He doesn't use the word floating, he says place some around. So he's drawing this irregular kind of a shape, right? And he puts a spot here and a mark here, and by the time he gets 2 or 3, he can see how to adjust it. He can already see the proportions and the angle of the entire thing with a few marks. Now, this isn't construction drawing. Although it could be thought of as a version of it, it just isn't hacking at the paper. It's actually using particular marks that are actually in nature, right? So he still doesn't make anywhere near the use I do of the word point. He really does do something slightly different, which I think is more common, which tends to pick up planar stuff, which is more like construction drawing. And again, but the idea is floating the data, float the data, and Paxton said any fool can close it into a continuous line. To make the actual shape, or what he wants to call the form. And he talks about angle assessment strategies. Now, everything is assessment, right? Everything we do. But Sargent talks about points and angles, and I bring those to my students all the time, that idea. So once you got a spot here, even if it's red, you got another red down here, it's got an angle. And you got to be good at that angle, right? How do you get that angle right? Well, it's that angle to vertical, and that's that angle to other angles. And you play through the assessment process, and you just start winning, okay? So he talked about the pleasure of the visual plan. Now that's the same thing I was saying before. What is it you love? I tell you, student, not to even start painting if you don't love what you see in front of you, because all it'll be is a chore of the worst kind, and you won't wind up with anything anybody else is going to want to look at. So, but in every little thing you do, there's going to be, you're looking for what's to love in this painting, right? And everything about painting is elevating, by the way. Or you're not in our field, you're in something else, right? It's like music. Good music is not what's the right word? Cacophony and music aren't the same thing, right? Generalizing tones by blurring. Now, this is very much about the visual order. It's actually on the other end of the spectrum. When you blur your eye, you'll see how certain areas really hang together, and they need to hang together for a while you work on those strong guys and have the general canvas slowly being covered, but covered in a way where we generalize about some things, or particular about others. You blur your eye, and you'll see what things hang together, okay? He talks about unhelpful tactile facts and tangible edges. He's talking about the real objects. He said it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you to know anything about this object, this thing. It's when there's shape, when there's a silhouette, draw the silhouette. But don't be thinking tactile facts. Don't be thinking hands and parts of this and that. Just don't be thinking it won't help. It actually will injure you. Velasquez talking about appearances over drawing. Well, Velasquez, we call him the first impressionist. I still think, in a serious way, there's a way in which Da Vinci is the first impressionist, but really he's more the first scientist. And but when you start painting from appearances as opposed to drawing objects, you're at Velasquez, and Da Vinci never did that I can see. Well, I said that, but I remember once seeing, I mentioned to you, a little postcard size edge of a woods, like a sort of a copse, in which Da Vinci had obviously flecked, just blobs. And in a way, and it was so small you couldn't possibly have drawn it any other way. So there was something going on in him, because it's the very nature of the visual to make notations like that. All right. Anatomy has nothing to teach us about the world of appearances. That's probably the one thing I just should have said. I don't gainsay anatomy, but I'll tell you what, this is the way to say it. You can know anatomy, you can know perspective all day long, but seeing is another story, right? And what you got to be good at. But the world of appearances can enable you to draw anatomically correctly, right? And draw it all, right? Change only one factor at a time. Now, this is, again, one of those very practical things. So I took the whole conversation around gamma was the back straggler. You put something down, and then you deal with what's not like about it, right? You have two or three things down, and you look at them together, and you adjust them until that thing that's least like. What is that thing? So we used to think it was a thing. We used to think it was the ball or the hat or whatever's in the picture. But it never was. It was a point. It was a spot in the picture. And it was either in a spot, it was either a color problem, a location problem, or a shape or effect problem, those sorts of things. He is saying, and I've been saying to my students forever, figure out what the one thing is that this thing is off on, right? Or you'll change three things for the one thing you correct by just painting the whole thing over and over again. And you also wind up with 2-inch thick paint. So limit the back straggler to one aspect of the area. So I tell students, when you're looking at the whole, and if you're always looking at the whole, you'll notice the area that's weird. It's off in some way. And then you just go to that area and you say, what's your problem? Is that a color problem you got? Or you know what I mean? And again, there's a conversation about talking to yourself that comes up in a minute. So you'll see how that's not illogical. So, and again, this follows on this follows on the heels of the last one. Correct without wrecking other work. It's really quite a huge deal. Can you do that? Can you correct just in a limited way? So you can see how the idea of putting down a stroke and leaving it, if you have an adjustment of an edge, and it can be done with one stroke, in theory, that's okay. Now, if you're taught like I was that a wet-end-to-wet edge is the more beautiful, the more aesthetic, the more craftsman-like edge, you're always wanting to do that. But in terms of the appearances thing, there's often a way to do that, to not injure that look and not tear down an entire area and just having to put it all back together again, losing an hour and a half when you could have done it with a mark, a simple correction like that. Finish and folderol, Constable talks about that, and this whole idea of finish is fascinating. Brackman said, well, when it's finished, that means you can throw it away. You've done it in. So what does that mean? That's an interesting point, right? So that's where I say the student has to know where he's going, has to know what the goal is. So when you look at nature, you have to know what the inspiration is, and you have to know when you got there, okay? You have to be aiming at it, and you know when you got there. And you'll be done. You'll know. Don't have an ambition that goes beyond that. Gamble would talk about pushing paintings through to realism. And that's not it, okay? Depends on what the beauty was. That was the central factor in your choice of that spot in the first place. Yeah. Stick to your last. Well, that's an easy one. We're talking the whole thing is just tones, forms, and colors, and that's what Meldrum. That's a point where I'm just agreeing with him. We've always done that. That's all that concerns you. That's all you can actually do anything about. Paint can't do anything, but those things. It can do shape, or spatial things. It can do color, and it can do values. That's all it can do. It can do what happens at those joints, gradations of things, and that sort of thing. But it's all in the category of that stuff. So stick to your last. That's what we do. Okay. Look at each new work and every day as if fresh. Now that should be taught by anybody teaching any kind of painting. Come in fresh every day. But we're actually told to not start up with yesterday's problem. We just come in fresh and just start wherever the back straggler is today. Forget what you were doing yesterday, and that's just on a daily basis. But certainly we're talking about areas. You should think of every area freshly. Look at the whole again freshly. Look at the freshen up. Freshen up constantly. Yeah. Have you ever seen that scene? Was it the scene in The Hustler or something? I'm forgetting where it was in one of those movies back in the good old days. There was it actually probably wasn't that one. It was a Steve McQueen movie, I think. So come in each time knowing nothing. There you are. How's a follow-up on the other one, huh? No agendas. Don't come in with these plans you've been thinking about all night and what you're going to do about this painting. Come in, just see the whole thing fresh, okay? And it'll be nice. You'll be very pleasantly surprised that what you thought you had to do, you don't have to do. Inequality, the law of inequality, that's just a conversation that comes up with him. It's just a well-known thing. We avoid equality in picture making. And frankly, there isn't much equality anyway. But when Gamble would tell us to light a cast, he would just say, make sure the dark side and the light side aren't equal. And that's just one of those kinds of conversation. Here, talk to yourself. That's what we were saying earlier. Talk to yourself using practical words, like ask higher or lower, darker or lighter of a note, right? If you know you're over there and you say, so I would say to the area, I say, what's the problem down here? Is that a color problem? You look at the whole. Is that even if it's three problems, if it's a color problem, correct it. You're going to have to paint with that color anyway, so correct the color problem while you're looking at the whole. But when you're looking at the color, say, if it's just color, not intensity, say, should it be more red, more yellow, or more blue? And it'll be one, and then you say, and then you'll notice it's still not there, and you'll say, well, then it'll be the other one, right? But it'll always be that, and you search for the color through those things. But that question, should you be more red, more yellow, more blue? Should you be darker, lighter, higher, lower, left or right, or whatever, all right? In relation to what, by the way? Never drop that phrase when you're asking these questions. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, looks like you'd be higher, but what did you relate it to? If you're looking at top and bottom, when you say that should be higher, you'll be right. So classifying values, classifying in general, by the way, we put things in classes. Values is the dark lightness, right? Hue is the color portion, the red, yellow, blueness. But we do that with everything. So, and then what you're going to find, like we do talk about angles, just do classifying, okay? And in a picture, you'll find there are classes. Like in a picture, you'll find that there's a middle tone. You look around, there's two more like it. Well, get them to play the same way they do in nature. If they appear to be light, make them appear to be light. Not that there won't be visual traps, and you see the next one. There are all sorts of eye deceptions. So that's why you have to check and cross-check against other data, constantly against other data. He talks about warm and cool, but he says often that cool is just a function of what's happening. It's in a warm picture, so everything's warm, so cool is just relatively so, and vice versa. To relate is to think. Now, that's really important. He says that everything is relational. To relate is to think. So if you're not relating, what are you doing? What are your thoughts? That's one of those things I learned to do, to keep my eyes out there on nature. And if I made sure that I wasn't thinking of stuff behind my ears, okay? Just watching the world out there. And if I was having a thought, it was about something to something, something to something, something out there to the whole. whatever. That's painter's thinking, and that's where Rembrandt says, when I stop thinking, I stop painting. That's the kind of thinking. I also recommend you read that Forbidden Knowledge thing. If you don't have it, ask me for it. I just found my copy. But it talks about how to get to cognitive certainty. And all you're trying to do, if you're trying to make a likeness, is to get your values and other things right so that you can have your likeness. So the problem is often not the thing itself, but the thing next to it. That's just pure Degas, and we've said that forever. And Gamble said that. I mean, it's common sense that you can think something's wrong over here, but in fact, it's the one next to it that's wrong. So that's why you have to keep watching, keep your brain dancing, keep yourself wide open, keep your knees bent, as we say. Now he talks about dominant tones and general tonality, and I've mentioned that before in other situations. Values affect appearance of size. So does edge sharpness. So pay attention to that. The more you fill a bunch of junk into a section of a picture, and all of a sudden you'll look up one day and you'll be looking at it and you'll say, why in the heck does that look so small or so large or whatever? And it will be because you didn't see it contextually as a value unit to other things. You get the values right. So that's where that Hale quote comes from, page 17 of the first book, 16, 17, 13, 14, somewhere in that range. 13, starts at page 13. But he talks about how drawing is everything. Very well worth your time. Hale, the 1913 book on Vermeer. It's online. Don't use the other one. The other one is full of... Gamble actually rejected it. He said most of the people around, it was printed after Hale died, and they believed that, he said that the other artists believed that the editing was problematical. The other artist, maybe it was just Paxton. So eyes are easily fooled. Now, paint the obvious, not the difficult. Take it easy. I say it again over and over. Just paint what you can see easily. If you can't paint what you can see easily, some easy relationships. Don't be looking for trouble. It'll come, believe me. But you'll find that if you paint stuff that you can easily see, before you know it, you can paint things that you thought were going to be hell, and they aren't. Always only one viewing point. Now, we did that before. That's the focal point, so we didn't discuss that again. I should have moved that out. Be systematic along these visual lines. Find a system for yourself, okay? That's method. Everybody has to find his own method. Once you understand the content of the visual world that we're talking about, you have to search out your own method, your best ways, best practices. And some of my stuff is very different from what Meldrum does in those descriptions he has in the book. And I can't tell if those things are his work or somebody else's. I think one of them is at least somebody else's. So now keep your original objective, your original idea in a painting. Always get yourself a concept and maintain that, right? An idea of the whole, right? And keep that fresh in your mind as you're working. And that can be even for a part. Get an idea. Get yourself a concept of that, section as a whole. The bigger, the better. The sense of unity, actually, which we mean, this thing says it's just purely visual. It is. It's got nothing to do with composition in the old sense of the word. It's a visual thing. It's the play of visual and the interrelatedness of the visual that makes music. That is what we call unity. So always the general impression, and so see nature as if it were a painting already. That's why I say I try to get people to see things as if they were flat. Close that one eye, see it as if we're flat. Then it starts appearing like a painting. Then you begin to realize it's just stuff on a screen, on this thing over here. Oh, this is greener, not in here. This is greener, and that's less green. Or that's richer, and that's less rich. So think of it again as if painted by someone else. Now that's the other kind of objectivity. Stay out of yourself. Stop patting yourself on the back. Don't waste your time doing that because it'll cause you to lose this kind of objectivity. So, all right. And this is the last group right here. So I think I've just about made it under, well, I haven't. I meant to do it faster than this, but this isn't too bad considering the last couple you guys have had to put up with. This idea of backpedaling, I don't know, I forget what the word was, but I use that word now. I've already talked about that, but anytime you're in the middle of a painting and you're doing something that isn't seen, but it's something rather more out of your head, then knock it out. I've been there before. I should have cut this one. Mental ingenuity. Now, I've said forever to students, what takes imagination, painting is an act of the imagination. Painting truth takes enormous imagination. It takes a very vibrant personality, mentality, very loose and adventurous. But you have to use your imagination to find better ways, for example, to see. And you're gonna have to find them. Even to the idea of the whole, it takes imagination to grasp what that means. You've got to use your imagination to try to get yourself around to that. But all that stuff is not in the subject itself. It's in the invention. It's really rather irrelevant, not in the subject. So looking more than you're working, as Paxton, he said, look 4 times for every time you make a mark. Easy to see, easy to define. Again, that's a very good way of saying this. If you can't see it, you can't make it. But once you've seen it, it'll make it so. Once you've seen it, but wait, you'll see it. You'll see it. I like the honesty one. That's honesty with yourself. That should probably be down there with humility at the bottom. Humility of aim, but just humility in general. Just get out of your way, get out of your own way. If you're really in this world and actually an appreciator, nature, the appreciator of nature, if you're in there with this mouth wide open, eyes wide open look of a child, something like humility is going to happen. And your desire to have the qualities that are there will cause you to have to be honest with yourself about how poorly you're doing, about what in the heck, why do I keep doing this thing? Why do I keep making inky blacks or whatever it is, Now, he mentioned soft edges, and we talk about reserving the sharpness of edges. I sometimes find, even Velasquez, there's a nose on one of those dwarfs that's just like sliced off. And it's just, it looks fine in the general impression from the distance, which is, of course, what we always talk about, what needs to look fine. But it's got this very bizarre quality, even from a little bit of the distance, of being just sliced off. And there's no other edge like that in the painting that I can recall. So the relative sharpness of edges is always just like the relative of anything, right? The darkness and lightness, well, the sharpness is a factor, right? But he's suggesting, and I don't disagree with him, that you set up your sharpest edge with the idea of reserve, much like your lightest light, that you could possibly even make it sharper. Or if you found some accent that you needed to be sharper than that, you'd be able to do it. Okay. And then he says again, this is the personal side, often there's an ulterior objective, a practical or a literary one. So if you can avoid that, you're going to have good results in the sense of learning to see. Okay. And that's your job. So I'm really speaking to students about this process and about people who, even if they're doing stuff in nature, making pictures and all that sort of thing, and they realize their level of mastery of the look of nature isn't very good, it would send you back, right? And you have to drop your motives, the art motives, and get to, and I say art motives, and I do mean that in what story you're going to tell and all these other things and what bravura marks you're going to make. You have to get to the, all those mannerisms. He talks a lot about mannerisms. I didn't bring any of those into this. But the truth versus mannerism, right, is the big discussion. But watch out for those, practical or literary ones, okay? All right, so I'm just simply saying we agree. Thank you, Meldrum. Thank you, Jazz, for bringing me Meldrum, and thank you, Rick, for handing the book off to me to let me read. All right. So I do really hope not to do this again, except if somebody draws forth one of these points and something really puzzling, something I find really might actually make them more successful, to give them clear understanding of something they sense is important for their development. Go ahead and pick one or whatever. Don't just throw one at me to make me a program, though. Okay. And I'm sure you wouldn't do that. All right, do share, donate. Thank you again, Amanda and James. Our subscribers is going up thanks to your sharing. So appreciate that, and make your comments. Keep it coming in, and I'll see you in the next one.